I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. How do you know if it's not working? Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how to know if your health plan is not working or is not working for you, and giving you some sort of food for thought, thinking about where you're at, what you're working on, what the goals are, and how to know if you need to throw in the towel. Now, for the most part, you don't need to throw in the towel. For the most part, we need to reframe on a couple of things that we're going to highlight here. But maybe as we're working through this, you can realize maybe you have been doing something for a really long time. Maybe you have been doing it, I'm going to say quote unquote perfectly and still not getting the outcome you want. That's it's a possible outcome of you listening to this. But the other possible outcome is that you're tracking the wrong thing. We've not given you enough information about when to expect to get better. And that's leading to this mismanaged expectations around what to expect day to day in your progress. And that's leaving you feeling really unsupported and like the plan just flat out isn't working. So we're going to talk through that a little bit today. And my motivation or interest for doing this topic kind of stems from a couple of things. I notice often in clinical practice that we will either lose patients, right? They'll not come back, or they'll cancel after a couple of appointments and kind of cite that things aren't getting better as the reason that they're not coming back. And when I kind of audit that experience, okay, how did that go with that person? And what did I say? And what did I give them that was so ineffective? What usually has happened is there is a mismatch between what I expected as far as change over time and what they expected as far as change over time. And maybe that's a communication error in those couple of specific cases. But I also think that there is a challenge with integrative medicine. Everybody wants to do things naturally, but they want the effect of like the Ativan or the sleeping pill, or that's what the effect that they want, but they want to do it naturally. And there's this mismatch between expectations and reality when we're working on behavior medicine, right? If meditating once, got rid of your panic attack, we wouldn't even have to have this conversation. But the reality is that doing things naturally takes time. The other thing is that I've noticed that especially when we're not feeling particularly resilient as a group, and I would say right now where we sit in early 2023, I've definitely noticed a collective lack of resiliency. We're just not as good at navigating speed bumps in our personal journey, in our health, in our care. And those minor setbacks, we're generally, as a group, having a hard time contextualizing it. So even if we are on a good track with someone and they have one night of bad sleep, it's tainting the view of the entire experience because we're not feeling particularly resilient to that. We want to see this like hand over fist improvement every single day, and we're not having a lot of tolerance for that ebb and flow of life on top of that. And that's creating some challenges as far as people feeling like they can stick to their plan. And so I wanted to kind of call this out because I do think that without recognizing some of these pieces, you are set up to fail overall, right? I think that's why we jump from plan to plan to plan, right? It's because we maybe actually haven't understood how long we would need to stick with it to see change. So that's what I want to focus on. Like, how do you know if your plan isn't working? Or how do you know if you need to give it more time? I really love the book by Seth Godin. It's called The Dip. The book is intended to talk about business, but it's of this very concept that it's about, like, how do you know if you should keep going, or how do you know if you should quit? And in that typical, I listen to all my Seth Godin books on audio, and they read like poetry. Honestly, they read like poetry. If you've never listened, they're usually these quite short, inspiring reads, and he kind of says, and I'm not quoting him, but something to the effect of, if something's effective, you should keep going, and sometimes it's not effective and you need to quit. And then spends the whole book sort of talking about how to know the difference between when do you stick with it and when do you quit. How do you know if where you're at in your journey is a dip, meaning that it's a dip in progress, in something, or how do you know if it's like he calls it a cul-de-sac in the book, where like you're just kind of stuck in the bottom and there's really no getting out. So you need to maybe change your approach. That's kind of the premise of the book. And I do think that we need to think about these things when we're thinking about our health plan, and it helps us kind of understand how to navigate the ups and downs of healing, because it isn't linear. It isn't this, like I said, like hand over fist improvement every single day. So how do you know? How do you know if your plan isn't working? And how do you know if you need to quit? So I've broken it down into a couple of questions that we need to be able to ask ourselves about I'm going to say baseline, meaning that like where we are, as well as our improvement and our progress. Okay. So the first one is that, do we even know what our baseline actually is? And are we able to like kind of eloquently describe, not to our doctor necessarily, but even to ourselves, what happens with where we're at on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, and on a yearly basis? Are you able to describe where you are before you even get started? And the purpose of this is that a lot of how we measure progress is subjective, right? How do I feel? How tired am I? How much pain do I have? And yet it's uncommon for people to have done enough reflection to know where they're at when we start. And so if we say, do you have less headaches? They go, right? Or they say, is your pain as bad as it was? And they go, no, I'm not sure, right? Because they don't know. They don't actually know where they started. And that's going to create an awful lot of disappointment if what we're looking for is some improvement over a period of time, maybe in the reduction in, usually when we're tracking something, it's like frequency, duration, intensity. Those are some of the main considerations when we're tracking something, whether it's pain or sleep or what have you. How often does it happen? When it happens, how long does it happen for? And how intense is the experience of it? And if you haven't done a good job at reflecting on those things before we start, you'll have no idea if you're getting any better. How often do you have your hot flashes? How often do you have your headaches? How often do you feel tired? How intense is your pain? How intense are your menstrual cramps? How intense is your joint pain? When you have a bout of depression, how long does it last? Right? These are the kinds of questions you need to be able to answer before you even start. Because, again, most treatment is not a light switch, right? We don't give you something and then whatever that thing is that you have goals of experiencing just goes away, right? Could you imagine? I mean, first of all, I would have no job if that was what happened, if we just gave people a thing and like a light switch, their problems vanished. And so if it's more like a dimmer, right? It's like we change the intensity or the frequency or the duration of the experience. But if we've never done a good job of kind of self-assessing at the beginning, we have no idea what to expect from progress. And the secondary question of that is like understanding the general pattern of your, I'm going to call it relapse or the worsening of your symptoms. So, for example, if someone has menstrual cramps every month and they average about a 6 or 7 out of 10, but occasionally, like say once every 4 or 5 months, it's 10 out of 10, like wants to go to the hospital. If you know that, when you start treatment, you can kind of gauge in your head, okay, you know what, about every 4 cycles, this is like a 10 out of 10 problem for me. That if you start your treatment on month 1 and on month 1 you have 10 out of 10 pain, you have context for that to say, yep, that happens sometimes. That happens every 4 or 5 months. What often happens, or the connection we make often, is that I started this treatment plan and I had 10 out of 10 pain. My treatment plan caused my 10 out of 10 pain. We see this with insomnia too. If we polled patients and said, how often do you have a horrific night's sleep? They might say, once or twice every 2 weeks or so, I have a sleep that, like, I just am awake the entire night. So that's like 2 out of 14 days. We have a terrible, terrible, terrible sleep. And we prescribe a treatment plan that's intended to help support their sleep. And if on that first night they have a terrible, terrible, terrible sleep, they stop taking their melatonin. They cancel their next appointment. And they say, that didn't work for me. I had a terrible, terrible, terrible sleep. And quite often I'm having to go back and remind them and say, well, you said you had a terrible, terrible, terrible sleep, like 2 out of every 14 days. Is this on par with our baseline? Right? But sometimes we don't even get to have that conversation because we've decided that the treatment plan didn't work. But really it's because that person didn't have a great understanding of the frequency of their bad days or their relapse points before we met. So I need you to ask yourself those questions, right? I need you to think about those things before you embark on any kind of journey, because it will improve your tolerance for turbulence. And I've used that word before. I really like that word when it comes to describing resiliency, because most things that are kind of happening on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis in our life is not catastrophic, but it's a bit turbulent. You need to have some resiliency to turbulence in your health plan. That happens if you understand your baseline. I have chronic knee pain, and it ebbs and flows from like a 2 out of 10 to like a 9 out of 10. But that means that I have it's been with me my entire life. I have a really good idea of what it's like all the time. And if it gets a little bit better because I'm doing something great, if it gets a little bit worse and I'm still doing my exercises, I don't quit doing my exercises for my knee, because I've watched this history of flare-ups over 15 years. And I need you to have that kind of relationship with your symptoms too. You need to intimately understand each other so that you understand if they're getting better, and that we don't reactionary quit our plan because we had a bad day, because you had bad days before. You just didn't keep track of them. So the melatonin, like the sleep, I had a bad sleep is a hard one, because nothing we do in integrative medicine is like your Zopiclone, and nor do you want it to be, right? Like the reason people are seeking alternative support for sleep is because they don't want to take a sleeping pill, and yet they expect it to work like a sleeping pill. You can't have the sleeping pill expectation of your plan. The bad days will still happen. The question is frequency, intensity, duration. How often are you having bad days? Is it less? You used to be 2 out of 14 bad sleeps. Now it's 2 out of 20. I feel good about that. Right? It used to last for 6 hours when you got a migraine before, and this time it lasted 2. I feel good about that. You still had a migraine, which sucks, but it was shorter. Right? These are the kinds of metrics that we want to be sensitive to so that we actually understand if you're getting better. this leads into that sort of next question or reflection point is, do you know how long it takes for the thing you're doing to work? So there are some treatments, actually most treatments have this sort of life cycle as far as how long it takes for them to exert their impact, where we see a plateauing effect, meaning that we've reached the peak benefit of it. And occasionally there are some treatments that lose their effect over time, but not many. And it's often like medication wise. But there is like this life cycle to a treatment. You start it, it takes some time for it to start working. We hit a plateau or a ceiling effect for how much benefit we're going to gain from the thing. And then maybe over time, the effectiveness decreases, depending on what we're talking about. But if we haven't done a good job as clinicians of talking about that, and you don't understand it, and you don't understand how often you had bad days in the first place, you can see how we have this mismatch in expectations, and you can feel like your plan isn't working when really we just don't understand the plan, nor did we understand your baseline. So most things, when they're studied, are studied over a 12, 16, 24, 52-week period of time. We study it for a minimum of 3 months for most things, right? If I think about the things that I'm most often seeing people for, menopausal symptoms, PMS, perimenopause, weight management, right? Like we're talking a minimum of 3 months before we see benefit, before we even look at how the participants are doing, right? We give them all this chase tree and we say, go home and we'll see you in 12 weeks. Or we give them all this HRT and we're like, have a great time, we'll see you in 6 months, right? We give them this nutrition plan and we support them, but we don't weigh them until the end of the year. And yet you are checking in on your progress daily. And if you don't have a good understanding of how long something takes to work, and you're checking in like minute to minute to see if you're better, you're going to see that there's this like disconnect between what you expect and what we expect. And then you're going to quit your plan. You're going to feel like you need to quit. So great questions you can ask your clinician if they're not forthcoming with this information is, how long does it take to start to see some benefit? And how long does it take to see the maximum benefit? So typically when we're prescribing, chase tree is a great example. For using that herb for PMS, we actually shouldn't really check in about it for 12 weeks. And part of that's because every PMS experience is a little different. And so you might have a great month that first month and then not a great month. And what we want to do is look at the average over time. And the shortest study on PMS and chase tree is 3 months, because we acknowledge that we need a little bit of time in between every assessment to make sure that it's actually working and we're not getting confused about how effective it is. And typically that chase tree achieves its peak benefit somewhere in that 3 to 6 month window of time. I generally give that a little bit longer than the research does, because I work with so many PMS patients and recognize the impact of stress and season and exercise and all of that on PMS. So I'm looking at it a little bit more dynamically than the research, but I would say in that 3 to 6 month window is probably where we hit the plateau of benefit. Meaning if you still have symptoms after, we should maybe stop expecting anything more from the chase tree. But if you started it and you had a bad PMS month that first month, it doesn't mean the plan wasn't working. It doesn't mean you should quit. But if you had a really horrific month in like month 6, it might mean that we need to quit and what we're doing isn't working, right? So you can see, like, I'm not defending your treatment plan to the end, and saying it's because you don't know what your baseline was and you're not giving enough wiggle room for this treatment plan. No, there is definitely moments where we meet patients that have been doing the same thing over and over and over for 6, 8, 9 months and nothing's happening. Yeah, throw it in the garbage, right? Like, let's start over. But in that first month, maybe that second month, maybe our expectations need to change so that if you actually know how long it takes for the thing that you're doing to work, you actually have a better sense of what to expect from it. And it's way easier to just put your head down and do it. And sometimes I'll have to remind patients about that. I'm like, look, you live with this every day. You have to put your head down and do it, and try to not check in with your condition every 5 minutes, because you'll be disappointed, right? Like, yes, we want to track your progress and your improvement, but if we're hyper focused on the lack of benefit that you're having minute to minute, you're going to quit before we see benefit, right? Because why would you keep going for 1 month if you spent every single day worrying about your lack of progress? And we also might miss that whole forest for the trees around intensity, duration, and frequency, because there's some subtleties in each of those metrics that you'll miss if, again, you're hyper focused on that light switch concept. Did I have a hot flash today or no? Right? Intensity, duration, and frequency. And then the last thing is that we really need to do this good self-assessment on how compliant we're being with the plan, or, and I don't like that word compliant, right? Because it sounds like we're supposed to just hit it out of the park all the time. Do you know, this is a question you need to ask yourself, do you know what parts of your health plan need to be hit out of the park for you to see benefit? And what parts of your treatment plan do you have more liberty on yes, no, right? Lots of patients can get away with taking their iron haphazardly. That won't work for other treatments, right? Your turmeric for your joint pain, you got to take it every day, right? You can't just take it willy-nilly. It won't have the impact we're looking for. Is there parts of your nutrition plan that are non-negotiable? And then are there parts of your treatment plan that are more flexible? You need to kind of know that, because what often will happen is that we put a ton of emphasis on certain aspects of our treatment plan, and they may not be the thing that's going to move the needle forward as much as we want it to be, right? So for a great example, let's say we recommend some flax seeds, right? Flax seeds, great fiber, phytoestrogens. And I will have patients come back and say, I haphazardly did X, Y, and Z, but I took those flax seeds every single day. And it's like, okay, that's amazing. They're not doing anything, right? Like the impact that we're trying to have, like the flax seeds were like icing on the cake. They were not the main component of your treatment plan. Here's your top few things to focus on. And so as clinicians, we need to do a good job of making sure people understand what is the non-negotiable. But you as a patient, you also need to make sure that you're focusing on the right things and asking yourself the question about whether or not you're actually putting in the level of effort that is required to see change. Weight management's probably that best example. Right? We all want our nutrition plan to be pretty loosey-goosey, and yet we want like incredibly accurate and solid results. And unfortunately, those two things just do not go together, right? It can't be willy-nilly plan with incredibly outcome-driven results. You can't, like, I'm saying in air quotes, lose 10 pounds by your high school reunion, but also have a willy-nilly plan, right? If you have a really specific goal, the plan also needs to be quite specific. And so that's a great example of whether or not we are focusing on the particular aspects of your treatment plan that need to be focused on to achieve the outcome that you want. Those are things that you can ask in your health visit, right? If I'm gonna let something slide, what should that be? Well, it should be your flax, right? If I'm gonna focus on something, what should that be? Based on your goals, these are the top two things that need to happen every single day in order for that to work out for you. But these are the kinds of questions that if we don't ask them, or if we don't feel connected to this information, you have no way of knowing if your plan is actually working or if it's something that you need to quit. Now, if you've been listening and you're like, you know what? I didn't know what to expect when I started. I actually don't know how often I was having bad days, or uncomfortably, I'm acknowledging that I was looking for the light switch effect in my treatment plan and not the dimmer effect. I had no idea how long it took for my HRT to work, my St. John's wort to work, my nutrition plan to cause weight loss. I had no idea how long it took for it to work. I can acknowledge that I was going to quit my plan and maybe I'm in the dip, right? Maybe I'm in that sucky period of time where I'm doing a lot of work and seeing no outcome. That's the dip. But maybe you're thinking, you know what? I've put in a lot of effort and it's been 3 months and I'm not getting anywhere. Maybe you're in the cul-de-sac, right? Maybe you're at the dead end. Maybe it's time to throw your treatment plan in the garbage and get a new one. Maybe it's time for someone to look at your case through a different lens. Maybe it's time for you to get a second opinion. Maybe it's time for you to invest in a professional, right? Maybe you've been trying to patch repair your health and DIY, and maybe you need more support, right? Maybe you're at an actual literal dead end and you should throw your plan in the garbage and try something new. But asking yourself these questions actually will help you better understand that piece so that you actually can make a good decision about it. I've seen so many treatment plans thrown in the garbage prematurely. I've seen so many people persist with a treatment plan that's not getting them where they want to go. If you ask yourself those questions we went through today, and you should feel at the end of that a little bit more clear on which of those two directions you need to go. And if you need a new treatment plan, I know a great naturopath. I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.